Great. Okay, my friends, I'm going to be giving a talk about coming out of the story of I. This will be part one. Now, I made up these. If you saw the picture I sent out on the Facebook page, I printed these up. I had them pasted all over books, and I was surrounded by books, all called The Story of I volume. And this one is 8338.3. Maybe you can detect what that means, some of you who know. A little code mixed in there. So coming out of the story, or the story of I, and I think of this as part one because there's a whole lot more to it that I will save for the next time around, which is coming up November, I believe, for me to give another talk. So let's get started on the story of I. Thoughts come together, and they create an ongoing story. Have you noticed this? First, notice, we believe the story until we're able to see through it and recognize it as a fabrication, or what I like to say is a fiction. It's imaginary. The thoughts arise, connecting dots, coming together in a story. Now, we love stories. We love them. And that's why we love movies and TV shows. But we don't believe the TV shows are real, right? Handmaid's Tale, are they really out there doing that? It's imaginary. We love, maybe so, but we love to imagine along with those programs. We find it so interesting. But we don't believe they're real. We do believe, generally speaking, that the story of I is real. Me, my, mine. Real, tangible. And along with that comes emotional entanglements. Sense of betrayal. That was a good one for me. Sense of betrayal. Wanting to be special. No one appreciates me. My genius is rejected in the world. Can you identify with that, some of you? My genius, I'm going to die, no one will ever discover it. On and on it goes, the mind spinning out these stories. As Joel said, that's its job, to create the story. There's reasons why story helps us survive. But when we believe that it's real, suffering arises. I am an actor in a play of suffering, and I have forgotten that I am writing the play. Now, I have a quote for you from Lama Tsering Everest, who's one of my favorite Tibetan Buddhist teachers. The name Tsering is Tsering, Tsering Everest, and you can look her up. She has many wonderful talks available. She's a resident teacher at Chagdud Gompa Odsaling in Brazil. So she's very available to us. And this quote is from a talk she gave January 31st of this year. She said, "You are the writer of this story. It's really like writing a book," she says. "Every thought is like writing a book. And then you become the reader of the book you wrote. You don't remember writing the book. And now you're the reader of the book? And you can't close the book? Not only do you read the book, but you're writing the next book. The thoughts are going, creating the next book to come. This is why it's so important to take responsibility," she says. To take responsibility, which is, by the way, in alignment with the first precept of the center, to take responsibility for my life, not to blame others for my own unhappiness, nor make excuses for my own mistakes, not to blame others. Well, what kind of stories can we cook up if we can't blame other people? I can't blame anyone, not even myself. Or maybe, I don't know. But what kind of stories can we have if we don't blame? Okay, so recently I was going through the center archives, the audio online. If you go to the center's webpage and look up publications and then online audio, you'll find all these remarkable, precious talks that Joel has given over the decades. And so I picked one talk called Drop the Story that was recorded 15 years ago in 2006. So you can look this up. It's easy to find and play the whole thing for yourself if you're interested. And some of these earlier talks, you can hear me questioning Joel. And I think of that as such great good fortune that I had the opportunity to sit at the feet of a teacher like this and to ask my questions week after week, apparently, from these talks. And I hadn't heard this talk for 15 years. And there I am questioning Joel. So in this particular talk, about 15 and a half minutes into the talk, I said to Joel, quote, "When the awakening happened that discontinued what you would call Joel, did you observe the mind arising, trying to urge you to come back and proceed with stories of Joel's life?" And Joel says, "No." So I said, "So it was absolute severing of the connection, and there could never be the opportunity for the mind to arise and plant itself again?" So here's where I'm going to have Tom cut to the actual tape of Joel answering that question. It's 4 minutes long. Let's see if technically we can pull it off.
Well, I think there's a mistake here. It's not that the mind doesn't cook up stories. The mind continues to cook up stories. It's hired to cook up stories. That's what it does for a living.
In your case, did
yes.
It continue? So the next day, it was still cooking up the stories?
It cooks up stories, but you recognize their stories. There's no confusion about what the mind is doing. And there's no confusion about whether the character in these stories is you or not. You see what I mean? So it's not a question of anything changing in the sense of something changing and the mind stops functioning or whatever. It's a question of realizing the nature of what is going on. And the closest analogy most people can relate to is what happens in a dream, the difference in a dream when you become lucid, if you ever become lucid in a dream. That in a dream, we believe that this environment we're in and the characters that we're interacting with and all that, we believe it's all real in that ultimate sense. And if we become lucid in the dream, what happens? We just realize it's a dream. We realize all these characters, environments, and everything, it's all made of consciousness, if we want to put it that way. But it doesn't mean that necessarily the dream has to change, that there's anything wrong with the dream. We are relieved of our suffering because we recognize it's just a dream. Even if you're in the middle of a nightmare, you know, one of those Jurassic Park dinosaurs after you. And you're terrified and you're running from it and you're looking back and you're running and then you trip and you look up and you realize it's just a dream. I don't know, you might, kiss the thing. You'd lose your fear of it. Now, there are consequences of that. I mean, there's certain things then do change in life. But it's not, this is what's so hard to describe. It's this very subtle thing of dropping away of a belief, really, that is the fundamental change. Not some change in the actual content of consciousness, as Dr. Wolf put it. And then, yes, you never experience loneliness again. What would you be lonely for? So there's certain echo emotions or forms of suffering that fall away. And you experience all your emotions differently now. You still have the emotions, but you don't experience them as problematic. So you can experience fear, but instead of experiencing fear as a form of suffering that you want to get away from, you experience it as something quite thrilling. That's why people go to see Jurassic Park. They want to experience fear. They pay money to experience fear. As long as it's not me that's being threatened. You see what I mean?
But the ego mind, I mean, perhaps in your case, the ego mind fell out and never arose again. But in my observation, my ego mind is very, very tricky. And it masquerades And I'm very suspicious of it. So I notice urges arising to do this. And then I think, yeah, this is the truth calling. And then I look to see, and, perhaps it's really, the ego mind saying, yeah, Mary Song, keep this story going about you, the seeker.
Right.
Who's going to become and become and become.
Right.
And so
that's your problem.
that's my problem.
No, you're in conflict with yourself.
What am I not seeing? Why is
you're not seeing that it's all a game, it's all a movie, it's all a
even the truth calling, that's a game too.
Of course. Of course.
Okay, even the truth calling is a game too. The seeker is also a story. And in my current language, even the truth calling is the story of I. The truth calling is part of the story of I. Of course, Joel says. It's all part of the dream. So around about that time, I had a dream. We did some dream practices back in those days, and to attempt lucid dreaming and to actually practice meditative practice when you're dreaming and so on. So I had this vivid dream that really made an impact on me. I was sitting in a car and I had my hands on the steering wheel, and I felt the warm sun coming through the windshield and touching my face. And all of a sudden I wondered, is this a dream? Could this be a dream? So I started to do a meditative sweep through the body. And I felt my hands on the steering wheel. I said, no, this is solid. I feel this very solid. This is very real. I feel my hands. I wasn't driving. I was sitting in the car. And then, yes, I feel the sunlight coming through. This is real. I swept all through the body, the feet on the floor inside the car. I'm sitting there in the car seat. This is absolutely real. I've got it. Reality. This is it. And then I woke up and I was lying in bed and I thought, oh my God, is this a dream too? Is it one dream after another? How can I know? I mean, I don't know. I thought that was real. That convinced me it was real as I sat in the car. And now I'm lying in the bed and it convinces me this is real. What is really real? When am I in a dream? Is this a dream here? These are very far-reaching questions, something to contemplate. So sometime after that dream, I was at a writers' conference in Port Townsend, Washington. It was a 2-week intensive. It was very intense. And I was in the auditorium waiting for the next speaker, the next author, to take the stage and to read something for us. And so I recall very vividly, I was sitting there in my seat. I was in the front row. I like to always be right up front. And I was contemplating, what would it be like to just snip out the story of I? And I actually imagined a pair of little scissors, snip, 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 almost like snipping a pie crust or something. Snip, snip. What would that be like, just to snip it out? There goes my relatives, all them cousins, snip, snip, all that schooling and education, snip, snip, all the triumph and trouble, snip, snip. What would it be like to just poof, snip all that away? So right then, a woman sat down next to me in the seat next to me and started talking to me. Her name was Sonia Lee, and she said, I'm writing a memoir. She said, the memoir is going to be called Wondering Who You Are. And she explained to me that her husband had a medical crisis during surgery. And when he came out of that surgery, he had lost all recollection of their life together. He didn't know how they met. He didn't know the wedding day, didn't remember the birth of the children. He didn't remember the rockier parts of the past, drinking or, fighting or any of that, anger. Didn't remember any of that. He could barely emote, actually. And she was tasked with layering in his memory. she had to tell him the memories that she knew. I thought, oh my gosh, that is fascinating. How fascinating is that? What a great memoir, huh? Good idea for a memoir. And here, Tom has put it up here, Wondering Who You Are. Now, there's a recent documentary on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, I recommend watching this one. It's called Tell Me Who I Am. It's a story of identical twin brothers, Marcus and Alex. Alex loses his memory because of traumatic brain injury in a motorcycle accident. The only person he recognizes is his twin brother. He can't remember mother, father, anybody else, friends, girlfriend, nobody. He has no recollection of the past. So Marcus is tasked with this layering in his memory. But Marcus wonders, should I tell him the bad as well as the good, or should I just paint him a good picture? And why, wouldn't it be more compassionate to leave out the child abuse part, or the bad stuff that happened? I'm not going to tell you how it turns out because it's worth watching that documentary on Netflix. Tell Me Who I Am. But again, I found that so fascinating. Like, who do you want your bad memories back? Marcus thought it was compassionate to leave it out, but it's a hard thing to decide. So I want to try something with you that I called chat poetry, and I believe we did this last time. It involves the chat screen. So if you have access to your chat bar, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're the one now who has lost your memory of the past. And it's up to us now to layer the memory back in for you. Okay, does that make sense? So here we are, your community, and we're going to layer in your memory. So in the chat bar, bring up my chat. Okay. I'm going to ask you this question. This will be your voice speaking. Okay, so complete this line. When you layer in my memory, please leave out. And so in the chat bar, I'd like you to put in there, what should you leave out? And I'm going to read these all together as a poem. So go ahead, start putting things in the chat bar for me. When you layer in my memory, please leave out nothing. The sorrow, abuse, and abandonment. Yelling at my mother. All the times other people did me wrong. Please leave out nothing. Please leave out the times I have been unkind. When you layer in my memory, please leave out being held at knife point. Please leave out politics. Erase that. When you layer in my memory, the things that still limit me today. Please leave out nothing. Please let me start anew. Please leave out nothing. Please leave out nothing. Please leave out the most embarrassing moment on the telephone when I was 14. Please leave out nothing. Please leave out shame. When you layer in my memory, please leave out the particulars, but keep the lessons. Please leave out false perceptions of others and events. Please leave out that time I saw the ripped curtain the morning after my parents had a fight. Please leave out what was not true. Please leave out the grudges I have had. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Somehow flows together as a poem. Leave out nothing, many people said. I want it all. I want it all. The sorrows, the happiness, nothing. Leave out nothing. Now let's try it again. This time, When you layer in my memory, please be sure to leave in, okay? Please be sure to leave in. When you layer in my memory, be sure to leave in the skies in Montana. Leave in love. Please leave in all those good moments I have minimized. Please leave in the birth of my grandchildren. Leave in all the love. Leave in hiking the Grand Canyon. Leave in the gold marsh and the periwinkle sky. Leave in the times I have been unkind. Please leave in my computer password. Who's the comedian here? That's a good one. Please leave in the kindness of friends. Please leave in my kind and generous heart. Thank you for acknowledging your own heart. Please leave in my love of color. Please leave in the lessons, the love. Please leave in the time lying hidden in the tall grass, watching the sky in Colorado. Please be sure to leave in everything that is love. Please leave in the death of my parents. Please leave in being held. Please leave in the nurturing I gave and received. All the laughter, like when my grandson said he had a new friend at school named Seuss. Turns out it was Jesus, and he thought the teacher was calling, "Hey, Seuss." The births of my nephew and niece, my broken open heart, the animals I have loved. Please leave in my innocence, my smallness. Please leave in all my experiences, learning about unconditional love, the smell of the high desert, sage and pinyon and creosote after a rain. Beautiful. Wow, so poetic. Thank you, Stella, Kathleen Daniel. Thank you so much. Beautiful. So maybe that illuminates some things when you think about your story, like, oh, all this has happened. What am I attached to? What am I wanting to let go of? You know, and sometimes it's the difficult things we don't want to forget because they continue to inform us. They continue to awaken us in some way. Beautiful. Okay, so now I want to tell you a personal story. I want to illustrate a time when I believed the story of I and I suffered. And then I want to tell you a similar story where the same circumstance happened and I didn't suffer. And then after that, I'm going to ask for examples from you all about times that you saw through the story of I and it dissipated, it fell away, it kept rumbling underneath, but you didn't believe it. So I'll be asking you all for examples, and we can talk about that a little bit. So here's my story. About 3.5 years ago, I was in Iowa by myself, tending to my mother, who was in her last few days in a nursing home. And I had been spending many hours hovering over her and speaking to her and receiving her deathbed confession and offering her food and moistening her lips. And on this particular day, it was my birthday. I've always been so attached to my birthday. It was my birthday, and the weather was bleak. It was cold and gray, and Iowa was dark. And I went to my mother's house for the night after being of service for that day, and I turned on my computer, and there was a message from a small press, and I was excited. because I had been waiting to hear from this small press about publishing an 80-page memoir of mine. And the first few pages of it had actually been published by another small press. And I believed the story I was telling myself, that the universe had set me up to succeed, that the universe was going to give me this gift of this publication, and I deserved it, and it was going to be mine, and I was going to be so happy. So I believed in divine orchestration. The universe was setting up this for me, and I was happy. Maybe I did the positive affirmations. I believe my work will be published or whatever. And so I opened the email. Rejection. REJEC, reject, TION, rejection. Did I say, okay, well, I'll try another place? No. I raged about this alone in a bedroom at my mother's house. I raged. I cried. How dare the universe set me up and hurt me this way? Blaming the universe. How could you do that to me on my birthday? My mother's dying. You set me up. I remember texting a friend and saying, I'm a loser. She said, don't say that about yourself. Oh, the story of I just swept in there. And that was suffering. I cried. And I also felt this door slam shut. Like, okay, you're going to do me that way, universe. I ain't going to send this out no more. That's it. Forget it. You tricked me. I really did feel this. I mean, I'm making fun now, but I really felt it then. And the door slammed shut, and I got busy with other things in life. My mother died the next day, so, I had a lot of things to do. My life changed a great deal after that. So there's an example of when the story of I arose. It started telling me a story that I was going to get this because the universe was going to make it so. And then when I didn't get what I wanted, I never get what I want. The universe is always out to betray me. You can't trust anyone, not even the universe. All this going on. And it hurt more, hurt, till you get kind of numbed up and you. So 3.5 years later, something shifted for me. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I felt that door swing back open. And I'm going to send this piece out again. I'm going to send it to this small press over here. This just happened. Was that last week or the week before? And, wouldn't it be fun for you to hear, oh, then they said acceptance? Okay, so I sent the story out, and it's different now. It's on Submittable, and you can just look and see. And so I looked to see, and it didn't say rejection. It said declined. I thought, oh no, here it comes. This is going to hurt so bad. I was afraid to send it out again because I didn't want to be hurt. So I sat there feeling like, oh, okay, this is going to hurt so bad. And I just sat there. Call this a meditative practice because I was waiting. I'm sitting at the scene. Okay. Watching. Well, nothing's happening. I don't see any story rising up. No story. It'll come though. Later in the day, it'll hit me. So I go about the day. No story. No suffering. No pain in the heart. Where else can I send my work? I said to Nirja later in the day, I don't feel any suffering. So it was declined there. But for me, I said, oh my gosh, look at the juxtaposition of that. The same piece of writing, rejected both places. This time it hurt like hell. This time, well, just a fact of life, that's the way it is when you put your work in the world. So, giving examples, I think, is a good way to really look at this more closely. And I wanted to want to ask all of you to give some examples about times you noticed, oh, no story arose, or a story arose, I suffered, I didn't suffer. Okay, so be thinking about this. I wanted to call on Nirja first because we've been talking about this, and she actually has a very good example. And so she's unmuted now, right, Nirja?
Yeah,
Okay,
can you hear me okay?
I hear you good. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, this is a story that I've been carrying around for about 50 years, and most of the time I really wasn't aware of it until about, say, 3 or 4 months ago when I got invited to my 50th high school reunion. And all of this emotion arose, this shame I felt for who I'd been back then, this fear of rejection, just total aversion. And it's like, I just shut the door. I'm not going, no way. Um, so I just sort of became aware of that at that point and basically didn't think about it again until about a month later when the in person reunion was canceled and they decided to have a Zoom reunion. I went to a fairly small school. There's maybe 40 people involved in my class. And so a Zoom reunion was a possibility. And at that point, people started emailing each other and talking about how much they loved Buckingham and what a wonderful school it was and how great Mrs. Richart was and they loved Miss Smith and on and on and on. And after a few days of that, I chimed in and I said, I think I must have gone to a different school. I hated Buckingham. I have no teachers I can remember anything good about.
Nirja,
And yeah,
did you mention the dread that you felt when you realized the class was going to gather? Can you talk about that dread?
yeah, it was like, well, it was so bad that I really didn't even want to look at it. It was just this aversion, and it was much easier to not even go there. But there was a lot of shame about who I had been and certainty that they would all hate me. So all of that was arising. So after I sent in my email saying I hated this place, all these other people started chiming up who had been silent, saying, "Yeah, I felt that way too," and "Yeah, I don't remember any." So it was like this real mix of people who had been there, and those who had hated it, and those who had liked it, and I started to feel a little easing of that dread and that shame because nobody said what a horrible person I had been, and then I started sharing. Well, there was one memory that I had that was really strong. When they had shown us this film, we were in 11th grade about Hiroshima. And it sent me into a hysteric, sobbing in the corner. Just, I was totally devastated by it. And I believe they sent me home from school. And I assumed that I was the only one who felt that way. I remember no discussion about this film or anything. So I typed in an email and said, "Does anybody else remember this?" And sure enough, half the class remembered it and had similar reaction to it. And nobody remembered any counseling or anything about it. Um, and I began to see that the stories that I had, that I was the only one and that everybody, was different. I was different from them. you know, in fact, we had a lot in common. Um, so over the course of the next week, as uh, the Zoom reunion grew closer, I went, I can go to this. I can go to this reunion. This could be fun. And I started emailing a couple other people that I had known back then. And it's like over the course of 2 weeks, that whole story just dissolved and vanished. And there was no dread, no shame. Um, and I remember saying, I'm liberated. I feel free from this. And it had been 50 years that I hadn't spoken to anyone from my high school class since graduation day. Would have nothing to do with any of them. And now I've emailed quite a few of them and we've shared stories from our lives. And I mean, it's like story gone.
What I've noticed is that you are actually more open-hearted and offering and giving to these same people that you thought you hated and you thought they hated you. You thought they saw you as a mean girl who, um, you know, they didn't like.
Right.
Those stories vanished, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it appeared to me that there was a heart opening where you actually wanted to be of service to these same people. Like, oh, what can I give? What can I say?
Yeah, and I feel like part of my service was to bring up some of these difficult times. And so after the Zoom reunion, I actually shared this whole story with my classmates via email, and got some amazing responses from other people who, you know, started sharing these really heart-wrenching experiences they had had and stuff they've been carrying around, and you know, it was really fascinating. And I've connected with people I didn't know whose lives parallel mine in many ways. So it's been really, letting go of that story has really opened me up a lot.
Yeah. And you became genuine with them. You
Yes.
became, instead of being cloaked with these stories of how bad it was, you became genuine with them and just started to share.
Yeah, and it was, you know, it's not saying it wasn't a bad experience for me 50 years ago and for many of them too, but it no longer influenced how I was with them today.
Thank you so much for that story. It's such a great example.
It,
Going from dread, and you wrote something called Emerging from the Dread, which I think is a
right.
great title, Emerging from the Dread. We might ask ourselves, what do we dread having to look at? You know, what are we dreading? So there's precious jewels hidden in that. Do we want to take it to our deathbed and suffer then in the last moment, still being mad about this and that and so on? So yeah, it took some courage for you to go where the dread was, to stick with it, to keep going, and let that open up. So I'd like to see if someone else has an example or question for Nirja or for me, but I'd like to hear more examples, times that you noticed the story and you either believed or didn't believe in the story, or have a situation where you could give both views. Robin. Hi, Robin.
I'm enjoying your talk so much, and I'm loving the story you just told too, Neerja. So I thought I would just kind of retell the story that I told in our writing group
Okay,
earlier this
good.
week. And yeah, so when I left Eugene, you guys, and moved back to California, you know, I became a nurse, and then I ended up meeting my husband and moving to the Central Valley, which politically is so much different than any place I have lived before. I mean, they actually have Trump parades, like trucks with flags with Trump, you know, flags waving. And so I have really felt like a fish out of water for a long time in this area. And so my belief was that I don't have any friends. I can't make any friends. There's no liberal people who live in this area. And I'm just stuck here. And I started to just like lose complete faith in my social skills and everything, and really started to believe I was a pretty good loser. So then, lo and behold, one day I was talking to a colleague at work who said, "Oh, I am part of this hiking group, and you should join." And so they planned a camping trip to Big Sur, which is the area I grew up. And I thought, no way, there's people around here that actually like Big Sur and like to hike, you know? So I went to do that. And then I suddenly had like 30 new friends. And this whole group opened up to me, and I found, you know, yoga, very progressive yoga classes and events and, you know, things happening around here that I just kind of was closed off to because I had a belief system that, oh, this community is too conservative and there's no place for me here.
Were you able to see that moment of falling away?
There have been some moments where I'll be reflecting to my husband, like, gosh, I can remember feeling so different, and now I feel this other way. And so it wasn't like one aha moment. There was sort of like a looking backwards and realizing something had changed. and now it was different. And I don't know when that moment happened,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a wonderful moment to catch, looking backwards and realizing, oh, it's that suffering isn't there anymore, that fundamental suffering. So that was very good.
Beautiful. Thank you for that story. Good example. Let's get a few more stories here. Times when you notice the story of I, along with that some sort of suffering, and or a time when you notice no suffering because there was no story. I think everybody probably can relate to that in some way.
So the experience that in answer to your question that I would talk about is with my father, who,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, he was on hospice for nearly a year. And in the last 7 months, my brother and I were taking turns being there for a month and a half to 2 months at a time. You know, just each of us worked on our own with him and my mother. And so what I noticed coming up during that time is, it felt completely right for me to be there.
Yeah.
And I felt honored to be there. And at the same time, of course, the things that play out, like, the little frictions and things with my mother or my father. And there kept being this sense of, for the good of the whole thing that was going on, I needed to really just drop that being petty about things or reactive. And so anyway, so it was like over and over again, this sense of needing to just release the things that were not going to be serving what we were all trying to do together. And then another aspect of it was that because I was there so much, it meant a long time being away from home and being away from Todd, my partner. And so, periodically I would just feel like, oh, I want to go home soon. Is this going to end? And then it would be like, well, we don't know. I mean, we don't know, how long my dad will have. And, I don't want to be thinking, well, it's about time, and it's just like, no, I have to completely be here and just, say it's okay if I have to be here for the rest of my life. I mean, realistically, I didn't think I would, but it's like this thing of saying, I'm not even going there. And so, and just being there with him and my mother and my brother from a little bit. Anyway, it was just this time of a devotional practice, and it's like I felt like it's like there's so much help along the way when one opens oneself like that, and it's really not about me. I mean, the whole thing was not about me. So anyway,
Beautiful.
that was a precious opportunity, and it was hard, but it was wonderful. I'm so glad that it happened and that I got to be there. My mother and I were with him when he passed, and it was really precious. So
I believe I heard you say that in that vulnerability and that willingness to be there, some sort of help arose. Help was there for you in that falling away of the resistance. There was something that held you.
Yeah, and the openness, just saying, because there are times when I just did not have a clue what to do. I mean, all these medical things that would come up and choices I would have to make, how much morphine to give, and like all these things. It's like, okay, I need help here because I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a pressure cooker situation,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've gone through this myself. Being present for the death of a loved one, and then there's all the family dynamics, and I have aversion to my brother, and he says this, and I don't like that, and then you got to the point where you said, I so want to be here for this moment that I'm willing to completely be here. And in saying that, you dropped away the conflict. I don't know what to do, but I'm going to just be here now because I'm called to be of service, to be here now. So, we can feel in your telling of this story what a beautiful time this was. Yes, sorrow, yes, grief and loss, and that's part of life's journey as it appears to us in consciousness. But do we have to suffer? The suffering would be to resist and to fuel the resentments. And my brother did this or said that. Um, but you chose, as a spiritual practitioner, just to be still and to be open.
Yes, over and over. That's it's really a great practice. I mean,
Yes.
no, I mean, all of life is, but it has, like you said, it's a pressure cooker and it's poignant. And
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
So
So
much,
thank
and
you.
I appreciate your openness and ability to give us that story. I think it's probably a lot of people can identify with this. Thank you so much.
So, yeah, and thank you so much, Mary Song, for your
You're
talk.
welcome.
For
Thank you.
everybody for what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, this was my path,
Mm-hmm.
was essentially I would have all kinds of stories, and they were horrifying stories, and
Yeah.
I would just find myself frightened or just incredibly sad. But I would start to investigate, and it was all because of a story. So I began to, just as you described, I began to see the feelings that were rising and the stories that were driving them for what they were, and allowing the feelings to be there. And I began to feel as though it's like by placing your attention on the feeling, it's like an embrace. It's a willingness to open completely through the realization that to do anything else would just be suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize that I couldn't escape the suffering,
Mm-hmm.
that the suffering itself was here. And for me to escape it was really impossible. And so I then began just to rest into it and embrace, like a small child that is hurt and crying. You don't turn them away. You bring them in, you embrace them, you hold them and allow them to be there with your attention.
Mm-hmm.
So by infusing attention into the feelings without wanting them to go away, and not embracing them in order that they will go away, but just to embrace them as they are, I began to feel joyous. I began to feel these moments of complete release.
Mm.
So this is surrender of the story, by not running away from it, but by embracing it completely. And then we see the truth behind it. So anyway.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. That loving attention that we give ourselves. And we think, oh, I need to be harsh and get rid of that ego and get rid of that bad story and rah, rah, rah. But actually, what if we tried the opposite and, to be the loving compassion to invite in.
Exactly. And
And
what we come to,
embrace.
though, is when we realize that to do anything else is suffering itself,
Mm-hmm.
and we're drawn right back to the story and to the reality of the story and to the feelings that we feel.
Gorgeous. Thank you, Todd. That's beautiful addition to this talk. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Mary Song. It's been wonderful. I've been laying on the floor enjoying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, there's a beauty to story, and you can tell from this this community sharing here. Wow, these stories, and it makes me feel actually closer to people. So story is arising in consciousness, stories, but what is my part? Am I the actor who's lost in the role? Joel often talks about working. Well, he used to talk about it. Maybe he still does. Working with Hollywood actors, right, Joel? And there was that one person who was like a sheriff or a policeman or something, and he forgot to drop his role, and he went out and tried to arrest somebody on the street or on an airplane or something. So he took on the role and believed it, of being able to see what is arising in consciousness as something that the imagination goes to work with, connecting dots, creating stories, beautiful stories, bad stories, oh, pain stories, pressure cooker stories, all these stories arising. For writers, we look for that, like, oh yeah, I need some good juicy stuff. What can I do? So yeah, it's all story, and there's freedom in realizing the story of I've been telling myself all this time is a magical fabrication of whatever we are. And I don't have to hate it. I don't have to kick it out. I just have to observe it. And in that observation, I can be liberated. So I wanted to end with a quote from my other teacher, Ruth Dennison, who has passed into the great beyond. And then we'll come to a close with a nice bow. So I transcribed this. I was her documentarian for many years and went around with cameras and recorders and tried to capture all of her. Never could capture all of her. But I wrote this down, and in my studio here, things just sift onto my table. It's like, oh, where did this come from? How did that even come out from back here? It flew forward, or so I thought maybe she wanted me to share with you. So I'm probably 39-ish there, and she's probably 69-ish there. She said, mindfulness is the most direct way to the end of suffering, to the end of our lamentation, to the ending of despair and all the sorrows of existence. Pretty good promise, she says. Mindfulness, we can say, is something which contains alertness and attention. It is supported by concentration. However, in function, it is simply being present. It is simple awareness. The Buddha teaches, she says, just to be aware of what we are doing, of our lives, of our behavior, of everything that we express as a living sign, a living gesture. Aware of what our life actually is. It's a healing, she says. A healing takes place. It is the way to a freedom from suffering, from all sorts of dissatisfaction which weaves itself through our existence from birth to death. You don't need to have a special medicine, therefore, in this process to become free from suffering, to come to greater comfort and ease. All what you need, all we need, is to be aware of the facts of what is really happening in your life this very moment. If we can just be calm and slow down and be aware, that is what is healing our lives. That is what will relieve us from suffering and dissatisfaction. Words of Ruth Dennison. I will give a second part of this talk sometime in November. I think it's the 20th, where I want to focus on gratitude which naturally arises when the story is let go. Thank you.